Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, depending on the place where you are. We are so excited to welcome all of you to our book launch today. The book is entitled Human Development and the University in Sub-Saharan Africa, Insights from Tanzania. So just a quick house rules. I would request that we put our gadgets on mute. You are not requested to remain on video, I think, for issues to do with bundle strength and other things. It should be advised that we switch off our videos. So in terms of our program today, I'll give 5 minutes to Prof. Mboyonga, who is our chair here in the SARChI chair in higher education and human development research program, just to make a few remarks. And then, of course, our speaker is Dr. Bertha Kibona. We are very much excited to see her in this space. Just a brief profile of our speaker. Dr. Kibona is a program manager for training, grants, and fellowship program at the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, CODESRIA, whose headquarters are in Dakar, Senegal. So before this post, Dr. Kibona was a postdoc fellow here at the SAST chair in higher education and human development research group at the University of the Free State. She also obtained her PhD in development studies at the same university, where she focused on the role of universities in enhancing human development in Tanzania. Dr. Kibona also has a bachelor's degree in banking and finance, as well as a master's degree in finance and investment from the Institute of Finance Management in Tanzania. So our research interest revolves around education, focusing mostly on higher education's contribution in reducing inequalities and advancing social justice and well-being for all. Dr. Kibona is keen to make a contribution towards reducing inequalities and exclusion to enhance the well-being of the people. And then we have 3 discussants who will join us. These Dr. Patience Mukwambo, who is now based at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, United Kingdom. Welcome, Patience. We are so happy to see you. We also have Prof. Johnson Ishengoma from University of Dar es Salaam. Mwalimu Ishengoma, you are welcome to this event. And finally, we have Prof. Siphelo Unathi. This name, I'm unable to pronounce it. So Prof. Siphelo Unathi is from University of Johannesburg here in South Africa. So we have 5 minutes for Prof. Mboyonga to make her remarks. Then Dr. Kibona will have 15 minutes, and then 10 minutes allocated for each of our discussants. Thereafter, we are going to have a question and answer sessions. Prof. Mboyonga, over to you.
Thanks very much, Edward. I'm sorry I'm not in the room with all of you, but I had one of those domestic emergencies which I had to attend to. So I'm not going to say very much, but as Edward said, Bertha's initial degrees were in finance. So she came to us to do her PhD with a background in finance and business, and she was concerned about the fact that she thought that there had to be more to a university education than just the human capital aspects of it. And she had observed, and she was concerned about the kind of inequalities that were playing out inside of higher education. So when she came to us and she was plunged into this field of social sciences rather than finance, she brought some significant strengths from her finance background, and that was a precision in dealing with research design and a precision in collecting and dealing with her data in a very organized and very systematic way. And she quite quickly, I thought, or certainly within the first 12 months, sort of got on top of the human development and capabilities language and social science language. And then she was able to marry this new language, which she had acquired, with the precision that she brought from her background in finance. So I think bringing those two together meant significant strengths in terms of the work. And of course, she was a really interesting student to work with over 3 years of the PhD. It was really, really enjoyable watching her work her way through the ideas. The other thing I want to say is that we all know that there are huge gaps in terms of the knowledge base from Africa and from Sub-Saharan Africa, and that the debate and the discourse around higher education is often being driven by people based in the global north. And certainly in terms of publication, that tends to get driven again by people in the global north, as the recent study by David Mills and his colleagues in Ghana has pointed out, so that African work and research and so on is constantly being sidelined. So I think it's really exciting, and I think it's politically and in knowledge terms really important to have a book like this appearing, which gives us these rather deep insights into higher education in Tanzania. And then related to that as well, and I suppose this is my third point, is that a lot of the debates and the discourse around the public good have again been dominated by countries outside of Africa. So it's really good, certainly in her PhD, that these were issues that Bertha was able to grapple with and contribute to the debate in very insightful ways. And in the book, she works more, she started to do it in the PhD, but she develops it more in the book, but using ideas from Nyerere as a philosopher of education. So I think in all sorts of ways, this is a very original, very insightful contribution by a young scholar who works with precision, with care, and deals with ideas in a very nuanced way. So congratulations, Bertha. We're very, very proud of what you've done. And we're looking very, very forward to hearing about the book and hearing what your discussants have to say. Thanks, Edward, and thanks for organizing this.
You're welcome. Dr. Kibona, this is your show. All the best.
Thanks, Edward, and thanks, Melanie, for that. Before I start, I would like to extend my thanks to the discussants, Dr. Patience and Prof. Siphelo, who are here. I'm not sure if Prof. Ishengoma has joined already, but I am really looking forward to what Patience and Prof. Siphelo is going to say. And for those who don't know, Patience was my co-supervisor for my PhD. So if you want all those stories of the bad literature review that I was submitting, Patience is your person to go. And I am very thankful for Prof. Siphelo to agreeing to have to set time for this, because he has also done some extensive work on issues of employability, skills development, and he was part of the public good project, which kind of shaped my thinking during my PhD and in this book. So I am very thankful and looking forward to what the discussants have to say about the book. Before I forget, my parents have also joined this book launch today, so shout out to them, even though I know they're going to have a lot of questions later, or as if they haven't attended the book launch, but I'm grateful that they could attend. I'm very happy for that. I also thought this will be, I should say this, I should extend my gratitude to the center, because I think the center has contributed a lot to my academic growth, from PhD and the book. You know, the conversation about the PhD and the conversation about the book, you know, were beyond and within the walls of Benito Koseng. So I want to thank each and every one of you, especially Melanie, for all the motivation and ideas during the book and during the PhD. So I am really thankful to each and one of you. I've included some of our pictures here to say that I'm still with you. When I look at these pictures, I think of you, and I wish each and every one of you all the best in making contribution towards higher education and making contribution towards human development in African context. I'll make my presentation very brief for two reasons. One, I want people to go buy the book and read, but also two, my keen interest is to see how the conversation will unfold based on what the discussants have to say and what people will have their questions and answers later. So just to give a brief introduction, as Melanie explained, my PhD, which shaped this book, was looking at the role of higher education to development. So my interest was to look at the contribution of higher education to human development, specifically from Tanzanian context. And the reason why I decided to do this was because, you know, we know from the literature that the focus on defining or understanding the role of higher education has been mainly on economic benefits. And we're not saying that the economic benefits of higher education are bad, but the argument that I'm making in this book is that the focus on economic benefits of higher education has been overrule or undermined the other benefits of higher education. And so in doing so, I tried to utilize the human development and capability approach, which aims to enlarge people's freedom to do and to be what they value and have reason to value, you know, to then conceptualize a broader role or function of the role of higher education in Tanzania. And this was, I mean, the whole idea of human development was not new from Tanzanian context, you know, drawing from the earlier discussion on Nyerere's contribution to higher education and his definition of development. So if you look at literature or follow what Nyerere used to define about development, you can see that his definition of development aligns to what Sen and Mohammed define human development, that development is about freedom. So same thing in human development, you know, we define development as freedom. So bringing in the ideas of human development and capability approach to Tanzanian context, was it really bringing in new ideas, but rather going back to what Nyerere introduced earlier on, and to come up reframe the current or contemporary higher education in Tanzania. So the main argument that I'm making is that in as much as the economic focus on higher education is important, human development and capability approach allows us to appreciate the role of other social political freedom in improving the lives that people are able to lead. So the book has 6 chapters, as you can see. So for those who are interested about the history of higher education in Africa, and also the changing role of higher education in Africa from the 1960s to the 2000s, you can look at chapter 1. So in chapter 1, I discuss I bring in the broader or general overview of the role of higher education in Africa and its changing role from the 1960s. And then in chapter 2, I discussed the role of higher education in Tanzania, and also bringing in discussions about the history of higher education in Tanzania. So for people who are interested about reading and knowing where higher education in Tanzania is coming from, then chapter 2 chapter 2 kind of covers that. In chapter 3, I only discussed about human development and capability approach as my conceptual framework. So here I discussed the human capital theory and show some of its limitation, and also discuss human development and capability approach, what it brings to this study, and how it helped me shape ideas in conceptualizing the role of higher education in Tanzania. So in chapter 4 and 5, I bring in some empirical information or data from students and graduates. So this for me, this was really important, because when we are talking about expanding people's freedom, then it comes down to expanding whose freedom. So in chapter 4 and 5, you can see students' arguments on their experience in joining university, their experience at the university, and after graduating from university, which is in chapter 5, which is only focuses on graduates' perspective. So in these 2 chapters, you can then see some of the constraints and enablers that students face throughout their experience, either from accessing university or their experience at the university, and some of what they went through after graduating, some of the things that they have taken from their university education, and some of the things that they would have wanted to have when they were still at the university. And in chapter 6, I kind of bring in all the empirical chapters and my conceptual chapter in chapter 3 to kind of now explain or conceptualize what a human development and public good in Tanzania would look like, based on what students said, based on what graduates said, and also based on what human development and capability approach say. So chapter 3 will cover that. I mean, chapter 6, sorry. So to just give an overview on how human development and capability approach helped me to shape the ideas in this book, is that, so in conceptualizing or thinking about what a human development and the public good university would look like, human development and capability approach allowed me to explore what students and graduates' freedom and what kind of freedom and opportunities they have, and if they have any, and also see how the conversion factors, which are enablers and constraint factors, play a role in students achieving or not achieving their freedom and opportunities they have within and even outside university. And also, so how freedom and conventional factors play along, and also to see where students' agency as active agent, how do they position themselves, how do they find solutions, and how do they find solutions to achieve their freedoms or to achieve what they value. So basically, human development and capability approach allow me to explore these 3 things in order to make a case on if this is a human development and public good university will look like, how or what kind of opportunities would students have, and how are they going to achieve their freedom, and to what extent are they, do they have maybe resilience, or how do they play an active role to achieve what they value. So I'll just give a few examples of the capabilities and functionings, which speaks about the freedoms, what students value. I'll only give, or I'll talk about few examples here, in which, in these few examples, you can see the wide range of capabilities that students from Tanzania value, and this, come from draws from being able to access university, being able to work after university and being able to develop and be involved in positive social relations, and also to be able to care and support other well-beings. So first, the reason why I selected these capabilities specifically out of the list that I have, and you can see the list in my book, was to show that, you know, the ranges of capabilities that these students value. In as much as in this book, I'm trying to criticize human capital by showing the limitation of economic benefits of higher education. But the point remains that in a developing country like Tanzania, people will still want to have the economic benefits of higher education. And as you can see here, one of the capabilities that students valued was to be able to work after university. And if you read through the book in chapter 5 and 6, you can see how students explain what this means to them, you know, to have a livelihood, to have to make money and maybe help their families or help themselves develop. So the point remains that out of ranges of these capabilities, you can then see that the benefits of higher education, there are ranges of benefits of higher education in which students are also talking about to be able to develop and be involved in positive and social relations, and also to care and support other well-being. So, you know, I thought this gives us a clear understanding, or a clear, basically understanding of what the broader role of higher education could be. But, you know, the good thing or the interesting thing about the human development and capability approach is that we just don't end here to say, this is what students value, or this is what students want. This theory also gives us a deeper values to now go and explore to see, okay, so if this is what students value, do they achieve, or do they have opportunity to achieve what they value? So you can see here, I present the conversion factors which, you know, enable and constrain students to achieve their capabilities. So for example, if you take an example of the capability to be able to access university, some of the constraints that you can see here is finance. And in the book, I discussed about how finance kind of limited or constrained student experience in accessing university, and how maybe public policy or gender kind of constrained their experience in joining university. But also some of the factors or enablers that enabled them to access universities despite of these constraint factors, you can see that there's individual resilience and determination, you know, where students, if they applied for this university and they were not selected, they did not give up, they put another application for another university, or they looked for a different alternative means for them to access university. And under family and friendship, here I only discuss about how family and friends came through to help students in terms of finance. If they didn't have money to access or to pay for registration or whatever, then it was the matter of friends and family that came through to help them. So I think what's important is to see how the constraining factors and enablers factors play in students' experiences, and how important it is to consider these factors, and rather than generalizing to say, oh, this is what students want, and maybe they can't access universities because of limited funds. You know, human development and capability approach then give us a deeper ways to question these things. I mean, you can also see, for example, in participating in university, some of the key things that was really important, especially when criticizing human capital, was issue of teaching and learning. So even when students were mentioning their capabilities of having a job after university. You can see some of the limitations that come for them to achieve that capability through teaching and learning, where students will mention some of the limitation on what they're being told towards their job aspirations. So you can see some of this limitation and what it means for students to achieve their valuable capabilities. So from the students' capabilities and their enablers and conversion factors, in the book, I then discuss what a human development and a public good would look like if we then foreground human development and public good. Human development and capability approach. And the point here is that, so since we have what students value, and in human development, or in this theory's perspective, or what Nyerere defined as development, what we need to foreground or to put much emphasis is people's freedom. So if we're looking at what kind of freedom students what kind of opportunities do they have, and we want to make a case on what a public good university would look like, I then discuss these 5 key points, which kind of covers students' capabilities, the 3 students' capabilities in terms of access to university, their experience at the university, and also their experience after university. So you can see that these points that I've mentioned here: social justice, equitable economic opportunities, public good, professional, citizenship, formation, and inclusive public deliberation. I don't know if I'll have time to go into details on each of these points, but maybe let me just phrase out on issues of social justice. So in the book, I discuss social justice based on in regard to what students, explain of their experience towards accessing university and the limitation that, they face in accessing universities, issues of funds, maybe issues of funding, for example, issues of public policy and gender. I don't know if Prof. Ishengoma has joined already, but he has written extensively on issues of funding on higher education. And from his work, or even from my book, you can see how funding play a role in student access to university. We have the student loan, which, mostly is not really also equitable, because even the criteria for students to have loan to access university, it's also questionable. So some of the things that I discussed under social justice is ways forward in how we can enhance a smooth transition for students to access university. And this doesn't only mean access to university, but also access to resources at the university. And in my book, you can see how students elaborate their access to university, that being selected to join university is one thing, but having enough resources, enough information about your experience to join university also means a lot. So I discussed this in my book. And also maybe another issue that I want to phrase out is about equitable economic opportunities. And I get this many times where people kind of assume, because we criticize human capital, we then don't associate ourselves with human capital. So you can see in my book, I discuss one of the pathways to have a public good university is through having equitable economic opportunities, in which here I kind of bring in some of the limitations that students talk about in terms of their skills development, and how universities train them for their future employment and skills development, either for jobs or self-employability, which I think is also important, because the main point that I make in the book is that while economic benefits of higher education is important, it's also important to look at other social and political benefits of higher education. And this is why I then discuss issues of citizenship formation or having public good professionals in, which means that if we are preparing students for jobs, if we're preparing students to have, these critical skills for either looking for jobs or entrepreneurship, we also want to have, professionals that think beyond themselves, professionals that, pay attention to other people's well-being. And so to conclude and make like a general point in which I draw from Nyerere's understanding, or what, a comment he made about the role of university, is that, I quote, he said, "The role of a university in a developing country is to contribute, to give ideas, manpower, and service for the furtherance of human equality, human dignity, and human development." So I would like to conclude my presentation with this quote, which, kind of shaped my thinking towards having a university that goes beyond economic benefits, but also considers other benefits such as human equality, human dignity, and human development. Asante sana.
Okay, thank you very much, Bertha, for that presentation. I'll quickly call upon our discussant. We can start with Dr. Mukwambo. Patience, over to you.
Thank you very much, Edward. And congratulations once again, Bertha. We look forward to reading many more books from you. Okay. All right, so I think this book makes a case for a broader role of higher education beyond the more common narrative that emphasizes economic benefits. And as I see it, the book significantly contributes to the global South narratives on higher education, as Melanie indicated, and fills 3 existing gaps in African higher education literature. So first, it offers an understanding of higher education in Africa in general, and specifically in Tanzania. So the book uses the Tanzanian context to explore how higher education can contribute to human development and the public good. And Tanzania is a very good case study to use, first because the University of Dar es Salaam has a long history, and that allows one to trace developments in the higher education space. And secondly, because Tanzania is also suitable for a capabilities assessment, given Nyerere's beliefs and policies, as Bertha just highlighted. So there are similarities between some of Nyerere's ideas and the role of higher education espoused by the capabilities approach. So for example, on page 43, Nyerere is quoted as saying, "Freedom and development are completely linked together as chicken and eggs. Without chickens, you get no eggs, and without eggs, you soon have no chickens." So similarly, without freedom, you get no development, and without development, you very soon lose your freedom. So equally, the capabilities approach is a normative framework that focuses on people's freedom to be or do what they reason to value. It enables an examination of people's lives in terms of the freedoms they have, rather than as far as institutions determine them. So for me, that was the first contribution the book makes. The second contribution is that it gives voice to students and graduates on the role of higher education. And drawing on the voices of students and graduates on the value of higher education, the book uniquely gives voice to this important group of stakeholders on whose behalf decisions are made and who are usually the recipients of education that is determined for them. The third contribution is that the book provides a theoretical lens with which to examine the role of higher education in fostering human development. By identifying key conversion factors, capabilities, and functionings, the book indicates what universities can do to foster human development. The use of the human development and capabilities approach enable an understanding of the ways in which higher education enhances individual and social well-being. It does so by informing the definition and characteristics of a university that promotes the public good. According to the book, there are 3 possible pathways through which higher education can contribute to human development for the public good. This is through, first, by availing economic opportunities for students through providing them with skills suited to the job market and for employment creation for themselves and others. And as Bertha indicated, beyond just the human capital emphasis, the capabilities approach also includes the fostering of other skills and valuable capabilities and functionings. So the university can do this through educating professionals by producing public-minded professionals who feel and are responsible for improving the lives of others. And third, through citizenship formation. And this draws on Nussbaum's conceptualization of citizenship. That means that one is a citizen of the world rather than a narrow conceptualization of citizenship. So ideally, these 3 pathways are meant to foster graduates who critically reflect on their past and imagine a socially just future where everybody participates equally and fully. In line with the book's arguments, students and graduates' responses illustrate that while they do value the economic benefits of higher education, their aspirations and values transcend individual gain to helping their families and societies around them, which challenges the ivory tower mentality. From students and graduates' narratives, capabilities, and functionings were identified, and several of them were identified as Bertha highlighted in her introduction. And these included being resilient and determined, being confident, being responsible citizens, and being able to care for and support others' well-being. It's interesting to note that students and graduates developed these capabilities and functionings despite the curricula and pedagogical processes which were rather instrumental and skills-focused. Students and graduates mostly develop these outside the classroom. And while the book uses Tanzania as a case study, its findings relate to most higher education institutions in the Global South. The findings reveal challenges relating to the curriculum, resources, especially accommodation, funding, and issues around higher education access, which plague other Global South universities. However, pointing to higher education as a space for capability formation, the book goes a step further to identify how students and graduates overcame these challenges and the related capabilities they developed. From these capabilities, the author highlighted how universities can support such capability formation. She suggests different ways, and I'll give 2 examples. First, by ensuring equity and inclusivity in access. Second, through a contextually relevant curriculum and pedagogical practices that go beyond training graduates for the job market to inculcate key capabilities such as empathy and communication, which are also central to the workplace. Overall, the book makes a case for an expansive understanding of the role of higher education to human development by learning from students' experiences. Such considerations would help to foster professional graduates who would be transformative agents, able to work and expand other people's capabilities in addition to their own. So I really recommend that this book is a must read for all students and people involved in higher education who are particularly interested in higher education in the Global South. Thank you. And maybe just one question to Bertha. You were talking of funding in the book, and I was just thinking that most higher education funding in Tanzania, especially for public universities, comes from donor and multilateral institutions that mostly emphasize higher education's economic role and the human capital agenda. To what extent are universities flexible to institute changes that will align with these ideas of the public good that you highlight in the book? Thank you.
Prof. Johnson Shangoma. Okay.
Edward, I'm not sure he's here.
Okay. Okay, we can have some views from Prof. Siphelo Unathi before Bertha responds. Prof.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, colleagues. Can I just beg your pardon and just say on the pronunciation of the name, it's Siphelo. It's not like an F. It's a P. It's Siphelo. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, I'm also not sure about the clarity of my background. I've tried very hard to keep this background very clear. Is it fine by you? I can also quickly open my window, my curtain. Is it okay? Do you want me to adjust it? Because I don't know how clear it is for you guys.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's
I
fine.
can continue.
Is it fine? Can I just go ahead? Sorry,
Yeah, yes,
I'm bad with these things. All right. So thank you very much, Bertha, and thank you for inviting me to make some comments. I really found going through your book very interesting. It's going to be an exciting contribution to, I think, the broader literature on higher education in Sub-Saharan Africa. And as my colleague has also said, I think it's got some rich insights that will help us to grapple with both issues of development and issues of inequality in Africa generally, but particularly in East Africa and of course particularly in Tanzania. So I'm just going to make a few broad comments. For me, I think some of my remarks will probably maybe enrich some of the arguments that you've made and maybe have some provocative questions for you and the audience. I started reading the book against the context of the history of East Africa. I was very interested. I had hoped that the book will expand more on the historical context of the University of East Africa. A couple of years ago, I had read the book by Professor Bheki Mngomezulu called Politics and Higher Education in East Africa from the 1920s to the 1970s. So I mean, where he actually traces this trajectory in quite an interesting way from the 20s. He talks about how about the processes of the establishment of the Federal University of East Africa, in 1963. But this had actually been a saturation point of a process initiated by British authorities as part of their colonial thinking about colonial integration, about imperial integration from the 1920s. Okay, so I mean, because part of the colonialist agenda was to advance education in the colonies and the protectorates of the British government. So I mean, the very interesting history that can help us grapple with some of the issues that you've grappled with in the context of the former University of East Africa. I mean, he talks about the Delaware Commission in 1937. One of its recommendations was the establishment of this interterritorial university. This was interrupted by World War II in 1939, etc. But actually, ultimately, these processes culminated in the actual collapse of the University of East Africa due to a number of political reasons. Okay, so that kind of history for me is important because it shed lights on this colonial and the post-colonial policies of education in Africa. Because it's relevant because soon after independence, each of the three governments that had been part of the University of East Africa resolved actually to investigate their individual manpower planning needs. So against that context, or in that moment, Tanzania then, under Julius Nyerere, adopted the idea of ujamaa, or the concept of ujamaa, which is a vision of a village-based African socialism. Okay. And even more interesting is that in 1966, Tanzania resolved to introduce compulsory national service in order to bridge the gap between the educated elite and the masses. And this is why Julius Nyerere's government produced these two seminal documents, the Arusha Declaration and the document or the concept paper about education for self-reliance, So for me, I think that, that kind of necessary history, is one of the issues that I thought maybe the book would have expanded, or maybe it was expanded in the PhD and of course had to narrow it for the book. So the second dimension of my comments relates to issues around theory and the concept of the public good. I found that very interesting because, as you said, I've also been working a little bit on issues to do with the public good. And I still, in the work that I've done, we've tried to ask ourselves, what do we understand the notion of public good to mean? And it's if you speak to political scientists, they may have a different, they trace it back to the social contract. They go into politics theory, they go into John Locke, they go into those classical political science theories. But, some of us have settled with this simple understanding that the public good is a concept that is intermediated by relations of power, the structure of, and the structure of the economy, but it's essentially a non-rivalrous concept, okay? And that in trying to enlarge the thinking about what is the public good, we have realized in some of our other works that there is an instrumental and an intrinsic dimension of the notion of public good in how it shapes higher education in Africa. So if you think about the kind of instrumental questions, the issue you talk about, so how does education contribute to building the economy? How does higher education, contribute to uplifting skills and overcoming inequalities? Those kind of instrumental questions. But there are also intrinsic aspects, of the notion of public good. In other words, in fact, even there are contradictions of some who argue that there can be public goods and private benefit. So that kind of conceptualization, or those conceptual questions still linger on whenever we talk about higher education and the public good. Because essentially, for me, higher education is a site for the expansion of capabilities and the experiences of human development, which you've captured quite nicely. So then the ongoing debate then becomes how is the notion of public good of higher education formulated in societies with very high levels of poverty, inequality, unemployment, and have experienced colonization? As you said in the title of your book, you cover, the context of Sub-Saharan Africa, which is still influenced by those realities. So I mean, the kind of takeaway issue in that regard of the theoretical questions is then, has the concept evolved over the various moments of Tanzanian higher education history? And, if so, how has it evolved? I was reading elsewhere about, Julius Nyerere, ujamaa, the role also that ujamaa played in asserting a kind of one main cultural framework for the society, it contributed to Kiswahili actually being even more powerful than English, as an example. So there are some of those gains that actually were achieved under ujamaa, and that still shape Tanzanian higher education. Fast forward, of course, to the era we're in now, where notions of globalization has dominated how higher education pursues its way forward, and it is against those it is against that concept of kind of capitalist globalization, where the very dominant notions of employability, skills, and skills for graduates, in order for, the universities feel or have been put under a lot of policy pressures to ensure that their students acquire skills that will make them employable in the labor market. But the question is whether or not even those jobs exist, or, if the structural environment of those economies actually contributes or has got the kind of employment opportunities that can come out of that expectation. So I mean, these are all theoretical questions I think you've expanded on, and you can expand on a little bit further. But all of this got me thinking, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room have come across Manuel Castell's concept of the contradictory role of universities, where he outlined these 4 arguments, where he said, in simple terms, he says, historically, the role of universities has been to be this, what he calls an ideological apparatus, and it produces these, and being a place of the producers of values and social legitimation. He also talks about another role of higher education. His second point about the role of higher education being important as the production of values, but he also says it's about the creation of certain dominant elites. And this is accompanied by the socialization processes that comes with these elites. And he also sees the role of the universities in a basic way as just training of the labor force, particularly within the state. Okay. And then he also lastly says the role of the universities is associated with the invention of the German research university model that had emerged after the second half of the 18th century. So there are these, what Castell calls the contradictory role of universities, and they often find, I think it finds expression in some of the issues that you raised. So he basically showed that the role of universities is contradictory. So my 2 other points is then, if we have this analysis of the university currently in Sub-Saharan Africa, in particular in the Tanzanian context, the current trajectory of the university is also not problem-free. Okay. What do these findings tell us about the future of the university? Because currently, universities are shaped by the dominance of a very strong neoliberal and managerialistic culture, okay? And for many universities, especially in the South, there's also the constant pressure to catch up. There's a kind of deficit logic. We need to look like this university. We need to catch up with global trends. We need to move up the rankings. And there's a strong competitive nature in universities, with this emphasis on rankings shaped by corporatization, etc., etc. So all of these issues do shape the context of what you're calling human capabilities, and how the higher education sector contributes in the context of this other aspect of the very competitive nature and the corporatized nature of universities. So, I mean, what I found very interesting is how you almost all your statements were centered around the notion of value. I think you use that word quite a lot, and it got me thinking about an old paper that I read. One anthropology professor, Robert Thornton, he wrote a paper where he asked, how does a university create value? In other words, how is value understood in universities? Because those who have read Marx's concept of value, Karl Marx spoke about exchange value, use value, surplus value, etc. And that question of like what is value? You spoke about what students value, and what students value, and what the kind of culture of the university is now in a corporate culture, in a neoliberal context, is also a subject of a lot of discussion. So my last set of points, I think I've gone on for too long, but it's questions that I'm still grappling with, also as someone who's looked at aspects of higher education. Because when we talk about graduate outcomes, okay, I think there's a fundamental missing question about how does the structure of the economy shape these graduate outcomes, employment, etc. Because there are multiple narratives that are going on. If you, in South Africa, in some spaces, you would understand that the future development of the country is seen by some of our policymakers is to move into a technological era of, fourth industrial revolution and all these other, global knowledge economy and all of those things. And so how does the structure of the economy and the dynamics around it shape how we understand graduate outcomes? I think capabilities is a very strong concept it's linked to functioning, it's linked to human development. But how do we grapple with such concepts in the context of a very rigid and also at times very harsh global capitalist logic of accumulation? That in the process of creating and modernizing our societies also can be destructive. If you look at the bloodbath of job losses in South Africa, you look at the inability of other countries to actually start their development trajectory and to diversify the economies because of this dominant global capitalist logic. So I think for me, these are the questions. I didn't want to just summarize or to reframe what was in the book, but for me, it posed sociological questions about what ought to be the role of higher education in a development country context, like Tanzania, characterized by the social inequalities that you've outlined very well. Maybe it's questions you want to explore in future projects, but I think a lot of scholars are concerned about that kind of some of the issues that I've raised. But thank you very much. This is a fantastic book, and I'm going to recommend it also to my colleagues in the sociology team at UJ and other colleagues in my faculty. And I think it will inspire a lot of debates, and hopefully maybe one day we'll also invite you to UJ to share the insights from your book, because a lot of our postgraduates are also quite interested in questions to do with higher education, labor markets, jobs, and the economy. So thank you very much, Bertha, and I'm looking forward to the further discussion by the other colleagues. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, Prof. Siphelo. Bertha, you can respond.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prof. And thank you so much, Patience. So before I go to Patience's question or comment, I would like to reply to some of the comments that was made by Prof. I think some of this conversation or ideas that you brought, things that I've been thinking through. So I published a paper which was looking at issues of employability in Tanzania, and the key point or question that I was raising was that, okay, in as much as we are questioning graduates, we are questioning higher education and how universities prepare students for job or graduate outcome, to what extent are we also questioning the positionality of the economy of the country and some other key stakeholders that play in terms of job findings and skills development for students? So I think you've also raised an important point here to say, in as much as we are making a case for higher education, we can't really blame higher education entirely, because there's so many other factors that play around and we need to ask all those questions. And another thing that I want to say was on the issue of Castell's understanding or questioning of the role of higher education. I've been thinking of this. There's a paper that I wrote and it was rejected. I wrote it on how students define the role of or the purpose of higher education or the function of higher education. And after that paper was rejected, I was talking to Sam, and he gave me an idea of drawing from Castell's understanding of the role of higher education and see how that relates or don't relate to what Tanzanian students are defining or think to be the role of higher education. I mean, I'm still grappling with all these ideas. I'll have to think through and go back to that paper, but it's sitting somewhere, and I now have to come back and bring in the concepts of Castell. So when you mentioned it, it kind of reminded me to that. So to also say something on what you raised, Patience, I think the problem still remains that even when universities have external funds, they have funds for other issues, I don't know, research, to how do we say it? To change some of the things on campus, to, I don't know, modify, for lack of better word, some of the campus facilities, and for student funding, you have to apply through what we call student loan board. So the student loan board has nothing to do with the university. It's the government that raised money for student loan board. And when university has money, the money will still go through other issues and nothing to do with the students funding to access university. So the problem or the challenge of student accessing university because of funds still remains, even with these other factors. So I think I'll handle it back to you, Edward, so that perhaps if anybody else has a question or they wants to engage.
Quickly, I can take up to three questions for now. Questions? I can start from the audience here before I go online.
Well, I don't have a question, but obviously I'd like to congratulate you, Bertha, on this fantastic achievement. I do hope there are many people who read the book and are able to appreciate the argument that you make in it and the context that you have so carefully, written out and explained in the book, as Melanie has said. So congratulations.
Bertha, so there is Melanie's hand. Melanie?
Thanks, Edward. Thanks, Bertha, and thanks to your two discussants. I think everybody's done a really amazing job in their presentations. Can I take you back to your notion of how you're understanding the public good? So by the time you get to the end of the book, and you took us through one of the elements in detail, social justice, but there were other elements as well. Can you say what you think, what is the added value of the way in which you are understanding the public good of higher education and in relation to a broader literature? And in what ways is it both the same and different from dominant contributions from elsewhere, Simon Marginson or others? So a little bit on the value it adds and how it's distinctive in relation to other conceptualizations of the public good. I hope that's clear.
Yes, thanks, Melanie. I think so. For my context, what I'll say is that my understanding, or the final understanding of public good, was that a public good university in Tanzanian context will have both private or intrinsic and other instrumental values. Because so if you look at what others have explained, for example, what students perceive to be the benefit of them having a job, you see that it's for their own good. Like I need a job so that I can find a house, I can buy a car, I can, develop myself. But, when you look at the data or what students from Tanzania state, most of them, it was, yes, it is for themselves, but also even the intrinsic or the private.
Have we lost Bertha? Everything's frozen.
Yeah, we seem to have lost her.
Can we get her back?
Edward is texting her to let her know.
Okay. Thanks.
She's probably going to try to rejoin it.
Hello?
Yes, you're back.
Hi, Bertha, you're back. So,
Okay, that's strange because I could hear you and see everything, but you couldn't hear from me. Okay, so what I was saying is that I think for me, what was different was that even what we perceive as instrumental or private benefits for students or graduates who participated in this book was that what they perceive as private goes beyond the normal private benefits that we know that, for example, I want to get a job so that I can buy a car or buy a house. But what came out was that most of these students, think beyond themselves to maybe include their families to say, oh, I want to get a job so that I can help my family. You can see that it's not only for them, but goes beyond to maybe include the extended families or their families, even before they think about the kind of contribution they want or they want to do to the broader society. So I think for me, that was very keen that even when we talk about the private benefits, it looks different in this context to what extent private is private to the students.
thanks, Bertha.
Yes, Faith.
Thank you so much, Bertha. It was quite insightful to listen to you speak about your book. I think building on what the two discussants said and your own experience in terms of reflections while collecting the data and also being a student, a former student in Tanzania, and what we know about what the CA24 was in terms of human development. I think my question is around what do you think are perhaps future possibilities of universities in terms of responding to the social structures in which they exist in?
Thanks, Faith. That's a tricky one. Do you want to hear about what I think is possible or what I think should be possible? Because what I think universities should do is what I propose in the book, and I think it's really, I don't know to what extent, for example, can maybe let's say an University of Dar es Salaam read the findings of my book and start implementing on that. And yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I don't know how to frame the response to this. But I think that there is a starting point. For example, with all the recommendations that I've given, if it's about teaching and learning, then the issues of curriculum, let's say, we can start there by having a curriculum that tackles some of the questions or issues that were raised by students, you know. But my problem, or my forever problem, will be to what extent can the University of Dar es Salaam or any university in Tanzania, you know, be aware of the findings of my study and start implementing, especially, for example, with public universities where most of the implementation, you don't have to go through the government. The government needs to know what you're doing. So I think, yes, there is hope. We can start somewhere, but honestly, we really have a long way to go. But I think it's a good thing that we are having this kind of conversation. We are questioning some of these things. It's the starting point rather than keeping quiet.
Just to follow up. Thank you, Bertha. It's because I asked because I'm also still grappling with trying to understand the role that universities ought to be playing in societies where they exist, right? So I guess two key things one, I guess, is around whether the role only has an educational function or it also has another function outside creating an environment where graduates should be produced, and they're produced, then they go to the labor market. I'm trying to think of something else or additional things that universities ought to be doing in addition to that. Just a comment, maybe just in terms of your thinking further about the kind of work that you're doing.
Yeah. That makes sense.
We have Shanela and then Simon.
Bertha, thanks, and also my congratulations on the book. Just a question, and I suppose not necessarily directly on the content of the book, but I'm thinking back to a conversation that you and I had when we were during the process of the PhD about the lack of choice that students who were enrolling for university had in what they chose, in what they studied, because it was decided kind of by the government, and that was and I know that has changed, and I'm not sure exactly if it changed during your data collection or maybe after your data collection. So it's more just a matter of interest of the extent to which you think, in light of your book and the thing about social justice and access, what do you think with regard to whether that change in policy, the extent to which that change in policy has broadened choice for students and goes some way maybe towards more just processes in access to higher education?
Simon?
Yeah, thank you, Bertha, for your nice presentation and taking time to write this book. Because in Tanzania, we've been facing the shortage of books, especially in higher education. We've been using the Nkude of 2003 for some years, and recently with TV. So I would like to congratulate you for writing this book. And I recommend that you should find a copy and send to Madam President, so that you can read these materials. My question is simple: that do you think that Nyerere ideas of the role of higher education is still valid in 21st century? What is your position with that Nyerere's idea?
Come again, Simon. I didn't get your question.
You had something on Nyerere's idea on the role of higher education. I'm asking, 60 years later, after a declaration after Ujamaa, do you think that his idea is still valid?
Yeah, no, definitely. They're still valid. So actually, the point that I'm making is for universities to go back to some of ideas or some of the comments, some of the ideas that Nyerere introduced, so I'll say they are still relevant, they are still important to Tanzanian context and even Sub-Saharan Africa. And to answer your question, Fenella, which, when you asked it, it made me think of what Faith raised. So that policy changed, except that my participants were the outcome of the previous policy. So the policy changed, students are now applying to a specific university, to a specific course. My sister, who is also attending this event, she is a beneficiary of the new policy because, she made an application to universities of her choices and the courses of her choices. So if University A don't select you, then you wait for an outcome from University B or C. At least then it gave students choices to select the universities and the courses that they want. So there is hope, Faith. Things can change.
Okay, we seem to be running out of time. I think before we end our meeting, I don't know if it's too much to ask. We would love to just to wave at your parents, to appreciate them before we close. Yeah, and the sister, yes, if they can see on the video.
You can raise the cover of the book as well.
Let's see that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We've come to the end of our program today. Thank you.
There's
Congratulations
my
once.
father.
Oh.
Thanks, Bertha. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Cheers, everybody. Cheers, Patience. Cheers, Bertha. Well done. Cheers, Melanie.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Brian.
Prof. Thanks, Patience.
Cheers, Bertha. Thanks. Well done. Well done.
Thanks.
Well done. I think that's who Sam. Ah, the brother. I thought I saw Sam. Hey, Sam. I thought I saw him.